Welcome to the Atheist Podcast. I'm Erin.
And I'm Kelley. Atheist is where we will explore American cultural trends through the lenses of a devout theist
and a devout atheist. We will discuss the messiness of being human,
the latest in social science, psychology, and American culture,
and what any of it has to do with Homo sapiens' longtime preoccupation with religion. Hey, Kelley, how's it going?
Hey, Erin. So we've had a bunch of podcasts, but we actually haven't talked. We haven't done a podcast since the fateful day.
It's been a while.
The election.
Yeah.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about the election.
I know. And this isn't a political podcast.
No.
However, I mean, in a way, politics has become and is kind of a religion, in a way.
In a big way. And I'll say, so as a spiritual director, I haven't really talked a ton about what it means to be a spiritual director, but what I do is I meet with people. And what I kind of say is I'm like a therapist for people's God baggage. And what we say in spiritual direction is like, wherever the action of your life is, that's where like God is moving and God is working with you. And so since the election, I would say most of the people that I see, like we have focused on that quite a bit on the election. And I can kind of give you some, like the things that people have brought, I'm it's a confidential practice, but I can kind of tell
no
you
names,
right,
names,
obviously
descriptive characteristics,
right. But like I can tell you some of the themes that are going through like the conversations that I'm having with people, and these are predominantly women and predominantly progressive Christian women who have, and we've talked about this term, who have deconstructed from a more fundamentalist framework in their religious practice. And so oftentimes, conversations about like my family voted for Trump and I don't know how to like reconcile that. I don't know how to be in relationship with them, or, how do I love these people who to me are, have kind of gone so far against what I think the message of Christianity is in voting for this man who stands so opposed to who I think Jesus is, Yeah. And so it's, these are deep spiritual questions, and questions of faith, questions of spirituality. And what I say to people all the time is, I think the most difficult and the most important spiritual practice that any of us, whether we're theists or atheists, is how do we love our family well? And so in this time, I feel like this is an incredible test of how do we love our families when we disagree with them. And our podcast is really, even though we have this differing core belief in terms of our worldview about theism, we have a very similar view politically, right? And so, and we've talked about that, like, even though these are, we see eye to eye on a lot of, in terms of our ethics are very in line and our political ethics are very in line. So, how do you, if you're making connections with people who voted in a different way from you, how do we do that? So I thought we'd maybe talk about that a little bit, because I think a lot of people are struggling with that. And then also a lot of people are struggling with like grief and fear of like what is to come and like what is going to happen. And how much power should I give to this election? Like, and what are the things that I can practically do to move forward in this time?
Yeah. Those are all Those are all really good questions. I feel like I've spent most of my time more so thinking about like the macro environment of
Yeah.
like, the big picture of history, politics, economics that sort of like show you where we are in this process and where we've been heading. And so I think I've been like mostly focused on understanding just like the moment that we're in and why we're in it,
Yeah.
as opposed to, I feel like I'm kind of in an environment now where, I wouldn't say that everybody in my family is politically aligned. Like there's definitely, we don't see that.
Differences.
There's definitely differences. But like, on a day to day kind of both life and standpoint and like work standpoint, I'm with people who all sort of have a similar point of view. So I'm
Right.
not being confronted with a different point of view unless I actively seek it.
Yeah.
And I try to do that in different ways because I think it helps me like retrain, because I think we've talked about this before, but like we're trapped in an ecosystem, an echo chamber that just sort of like reinforces the things that you think all the time, right?
Right.
Like our entire media apparatus is now designed that way.
Right.
Anything that was common, like the only thing that's common now is like maybe if you watch sports, you're gonna see like the same things that people like that are maybe in a
Yeah.
slightly different. But otherwise, like our reality is to only consume information that is of our
Geared
own perspective.
geared
Yeah.
towards us. Right.
And if anything, will like push us further down a path of our own perspective.
Right. And because of that, oftentimes, we don't have a lot of friends that think differently than us. You know, um, I know a lot of people who don't know anybody who voted for Trump, right?
Yeah.
And um, and so sometimes those people are the people in our families because those are the people we can't choose, right? They are the
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
that we just get. And so sometimes that's and so there's a term called bridge relationships. And I forget the sociologist, but I read this. He wrote wrote a book, I think in the 70s or 80s. And there was an article interviewing him and talking about and he kind of predicted this happening, that people were having because of the breakdown of community. I think he might have written the book Bowling Alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that it?
No, I mean, it is the thesis of that book. Like, I don't know
Right.
if it's the same book, but like
I think it
there are
might be the
other
same book.
there are other books that are kind of arguing the same. It's what David Brooks has been talking about this
Yeah,
for like
right,
decades. Yeah,
Decades,
yeah.
right? That we're the breakdown of community, right, is that and moving into these kind of tribal systems, these kind of ideological tribal systems, means that we don't have these bridge relationships. So we don't know how to be friends with people who don't agree with us.
Yeah.
And because people are not, and so churches and religious organizations are often those places where we find those relationships. But even those places are kind of splintering off into their own little tribal communities. I'm not going to go to that church because it doesn't,
Yep.
follow
Yeah.
this kind of political ideology. So, yeah. So, what do we do?
I mean, I'm such an admire the problem person. No, I don't know. I mean, I am action oriented, but I do spend a lot of time trying to admire the problem because
Yeah.
in order to understand,
Yeah.
it's like you want to take an action, but like you want to take the action that is the right action to suit the whatever is at play, right?
Right.
So I mean, I think what I've been spending a lot of time doing and thinking about is like kind of examining what David Brooks, I was thinking about that, like, man, this is a guy who for like 20 years has been like, guys, this is a problem, right?
This is
And
a
then
problem.
it's like, he's like, it finally hits.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I've been waiting my whole life
Yeah.
to, and but we've talked about this other book, which is The Fourth Turning, on here before, which is essentially this idea that like each generation is like a 25-year, cohort where they're like sort of
Mm-hmm.
in power. And that like as you go through 100-year cycle, you're going to go through these like different seasons
Mm-hmm.
of but one of these is like, so the last one, if as I recall, is like this crisis time. And then the what comes out of that crisis time is like the coming back together is like a revival of community,
Mm,
which would obviously be the best solution, right? Or what we hope would be the solution
yeah.
here. To me, part of it is like this deep hope, which I'm sure will be dashed, but is like that everybody will recognize like what the internet has been doing to their brains, and they'll be like, oh, I don't actually want that. What I want is like real human interaction and to really know people, and like that we like wake up out of this,
Right. 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 But I think the problem, and I think the problem that we're seeing too is like the internet and all of this has exacerbated and probably sped up the problems that are already existing.
Yeah.
So
Those
so
cycles are shorter.
yeah, so this
Yeah.
this loneliness epidemic, right, which is kind of the bowling alone, like we're not being in community, is supported by the internet because we can feel this false sense of community.
Yeah.
But also there's also reasons why we're not in community, because other than just the internet. Um, and one of the things, one of the articles David Brooks wrote is like on like, why did this happen? Like, how did the Democrats lose the working class? And there is something that has happened, that Democrats have lost people. We have become the party of the knowledge worker, and we have, whether it's a perceived or a real thing, become the party of the elite
Yeah.
in some ways.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and I get that there's a lot of arguments that people could make of like, Biden has been the most progressive president when it comes to like, unions and actually dismantling a little bit of this like, um, have and have nots reality, right? Where like we keep siphoning, like the 1% keeps getting more and more of the
Yep.
pie. And you don't really have a middle class anymore. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons to argue like that he's been the best person for that.
Right.
But the problem is that like
The messaging.
perception is reality.
Yes.
Not
Not reality.
Yeah. And
For
so
sure.
the messaging has not been good. I mean, and it's like, and we could look at there's probably lots of reasons why, but like the reality is that we are in the information ecosystem we are in. So the old rules don't apply anymore.
Right. Right.
And that is a strength, I think, of like, I mean, when I think about like the campaign that Trump ran, well, if you can, for whatever campaign you can call that, I know there was a lot of dysfunction, but like the thing that he got right, I think, was like leaning into this new new information ecosystems. So going on podcast,
Joe Rogan.
Yep.
Speaking to a bunch of lonely men who feel exiled from community.
I mean, but even like, I mean, I don't know. I've listened to some Joe Rogan because I want to understand, what's going on in that show. And it's like, and it drove me crazy that the Harris campaign was like, oh no, we're clutching our pearls and we can't go on the show. This is the problem.
Yes.
And I think she probably would have done it, but I think people
around her,
on her team didn't want her to do it. And it's like, if you listen to that show, this is just a guy who's like, I mean, to get a sense of the scale of like his audience, right? You would have to go on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC every night for a week to reach the same audience.
Why do you say no to that? How
you
do you say
shouldn't say no to that, right?
No.
And if you listen to the show, it's like he kind of wants every person he talks to, he like tries to make look good.
Yeah.
Like he wants to enjoy having a conversation with them. And it's not like it's a hard interview kind of
Right.
situation. Now, has that obviously led to problems where it's like you have people that come on a show that have anti-vax views and he's like, hey, we're buddies, right? Like but that's like how, I mean, and I get the arguments of like,
it's not like
there
going
should
on 60 Minutes.
Right. And he doesn't pretend like he doesn't pretend to be a journalist. Now, there are people who would say, hey, you do have this audience that is this big and you have a responsibility. And I mean, I don't know. We can debate those things all day.
But it just doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
He has the audience and he has people's ear and people believe him.
Yeah. And like the podcast medium too is just, it's incredibly powerful. Like you're in someone's like ears, talking to them. And I mean, when we think about like the way the media ecosystem is moving, one of the only venue in which supported sponsored media is growing is podcasting.
Yeah,
because not only people are doing it, but it's effective. Like it's an effective venue to send that messaging.
Right. So I saw an interview on CBS Sunday Morning last week with they interviewed Elvis Duran, who is one of the longest running DJs, and he's in like 70 or 80 markets all over the country. He does Elvis Duran in the morning, and he's probably one of the last DJs. And it was so interesting because he talked about why he wanted to do this job. And he said when he was a kid, he was a really lonely kid. And so he used to listen to the radio, and that the DJs were really like, he felt like he knew them, you know?
Yeah.
And so that is, we don't listen to the radio anymore, really. We have, but that's that's the thing that he feels like he fills when he does that job. He feels like he makes people not feel lonely. And that's, what people turn to podcasters for. You feel like you kind of know this person, you get their personality, right? And so there's a sense that when you step into that void of relationships that people have, that's a lot of power.
Yeah. Our producer has a question.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Actually, not so much a question, but I did think of something that I thought might be of interest. Do either of you remember it was a documentary on Netflix a number of years ago. It was like Beyond the Curve or something like that. It was about flat earthers. And so it was a really fascinating conversation because it explored people who genuinely believe that the earth is flat. There's this giant conspiracy. And it makes me think of the Joe Rogan bringing on anti-vaxxers. He's brought on Alex Jones. I don't ever want to elevate Alex Jones, but he has brought on people who criticize mainstream science.
Yeah.
And what makes me think of this documentary is that at the end of the documentary, they are talking to hardened scientists who say, the failure's on us. We were so quick to dismiss what we consider to be the complete bullshit kind of approach to the world. Like, that we never even bothered to engage people who, even though they're objectively wrong, they are trying to engage in this. And we swept them away saying there's no way you could possibly be right. And as a result, we allowed this movement to grow to a point where people are actively denying science.
Right. Because it's not about the science. It's not about the reality it's not about truth. It's about community. It's about finding connection.
If you listen to a bunch of his episodes back to back, you really do see, like, this is not a guy with a major political agenda or anything like that. This is a guy who just wants to talk and elevate voices.
Right. And he wants to sell his podcast. He wants to make a shit ton of money. Yeah. And so bringing on people that are,
famous.
Famous, and also that are shit disturbers, is gonna bring in money.
Yeah.
which is that
Yes.
fractured media that you're talking about,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, but like if you're talking about like consolidating some media, he's done it. He's done the work of and not just consolidating a huge multi-demographic. Like, yes, does his podcast skew men? Of course, right? Does it
Right.
skew probably younger men? Of course. But like, is there a bigger audience there too?
Of
Absolutely.
course.
You
Of
can't get the
course.
numbers that we're talking about without it being appealing to like a pretty broad section of
Right.
humans.
Even if you're just like curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think the people that listen to the show are people who are like, I'm not necessarily here to like learn about politics or anything. You know, it's like, hey, I'm here to learn whatever this person has to share today. And it just seems like and this is my issue with this kind of goes to what Justin was saying, is my issue with the Democratic Party is there's a lot of pearl clutching, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, we can't possibly talk to those people or be on that show or
Right.
whatever. And it's like, what,
And you're just stepping right into the caricature that people are creating, right?
Yeah.
This like whatever, quote unquote, woke culture. Like, I can't do that. Like, that's somehow unwoke to be on Joe Rogan.
Right. Yeah.
When it just is not smart, like media savvy.
Yeah. Not if you're trying to win.
Not if you're trying to win. Not if you're trying to win. Right.
I mean, that being said, like, we're also kind of talking about something that shouldn't have even happened in the first place, because Joe Biden shouldn't have run for a second term. Like he said, he was always going to be a bridge candidate.
I agree.
Then I don't know how or why, either he convinced himself or his people around him to convince him to do this. But like that set everybody up for failure, I think. I mean, from the jump. So, I mean, I think that most Democrats that I knew were pretty dismayed when he chose to run again. And everybody was like, please get out of the race, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that wasn't saying that, really.
Yeah.
A couple of writers that I would sometimes read that did see the value of the
incumbent
agenda, agenda that he was able to pass, that was like actually he had some bipartisan legislation that he was able to pass. But I mean, everybody wanted him to get out of the race. So I don't know. Okay, but that's neither here nor there.
Neither here nor there. So where are we?
Well, from a religion standpoint, like one anecdote that kept like jumping into my head was, probably a really interesting book if you're trying to think about like the psychology of all of this, was one that was published, several years ago. I mean, like way before we were in like Trump politics, right? It's called The Righteous Mind. And our buddy Jonathan Haidt, who we've talked about on the show, who's the anxious generation guy, he's like, now he's literally getting laws passed in Australia. They passed a law banning social media for people under age of 16. And like, I mean, we know that it is due, I think, in very large part to his effort. Like, if you ever think to yourself, like, if I wrote a book, that really well-researched book that could change the world, like he did it.
He's done it.
But way before he was even interested in this issue of social media and the anxious generation, his interest was really like as more of like a moral psychologist is his background.
Right.
And he, is interested in politics. And when he actually, I think when he was going to write the Anxious Generation, before he even started that book, he wanted to actually continue to write about politics. But kind of started to realize the influence that our media environment was having on all of these things, and then specifically got really, he saw the data around this like really, really acute problem with young people and was like, we got to do something about it. I think he, as a parent, probably of kids that age, really like dove into that. But anyway, so backtracking to the Righteous Mind. So the Righteous Mind, he talks about morality binds and blinds,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like religion binds and blinds, politics,
Yeah.
these teams that we put ourselves on, like we bind ourselves to the members of the team and then blind ourselves to any information that disproves
Yes.
our theory of the case. And the biggest issue with that, and I try to play this role in a lot of the places that I occupy,
Yeah.
is to be like, well, what if we disagreed, or what if we didn't blind ourselves? Like, do we see merit in these other ideas? And I even find that like that tension causes, there's
Oh,
a
yeah.
little like friction there
Oh,
when
for sure.
even to pose the question, though,
Yes. Right.
and as like it's not even like I'm 100% sold on an idea, but it's like to even pose the question and challenge, like, well, was this really is this a good idea? Is this a good idea? Like it's hard to even pose that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I super agree. I am I'm lucky to have some uh really smart, thoughtful people in my life who believe very different things than me. And this summer I spent time with one of my oldest friends who uh she's incredibly bright. She's a lawyer. Uh she has she has very differing views from me in terms of religion and things like that, but we also have differing political views. And I was able to spend like a good 5 days with her and just have these really thoughtful conversations. And um and it wasn't charged because she was not a family member. So we were not like fighting. I wasn't trying to change her mind. I was truly we were both trying to have these conversations where the goal was, and this is a David Brooks thing, and how to know a person. I was having conversations that were geared towards learning as opposed to winning. Right. And,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
and I don't think either of us left necessarily completely change. Like we didn't change, like we weren't going to change who we were voting for, but I had a much better idea, a much broader understanding than I had before. And I don't feel like I feel like she did take some of my blinders off.
Mm,
Like you're saying.
yeah.
Um, which was good, which was helpful because it at this point, while I'm disappointed, I'm also not uh I don't think I am at the like um apocalyptic, stage that a lot of people are.
No, I'm not at all. And it's interesting. Like I was actually much more upset, like caught off guard and upset the first time around. I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, like how could this happen?" Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then this time around, I'm like, "Yeah, that makes sense." Like it's I
mean,
don't. Yeah.
it does. I mean, because this is who America is.
Well, now I don't even. I mean, part of it is. So, okay,
And
when you say that,
I'm not saying that in a I'm not saying that in a fully derogatory way. Maybe a partially derogatory.
okay.
We're a complicated people and we have a complicated history, and we are our country has been steeped in patriarchy and a Christian patriarchy, and also steeped in a kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps working mentality. And I'm not saying that's not a bad thing. Like these are complicated things.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think these things have gotten more complicated. And I think Trump didn't make these things happen. He is a very savvy, I don't think he's a smart person, but I think he's a savvy businessman.
Yeah.
And I think he swooped right into the zeitgeist of who we are as a nation and spoke into that, even if he doesn't necessarily believe the things that he's saying.
Yeah. No, he's a salesman, right? Like he's
sure.
just trying to sell whatever, himself
Yep.
essentially, but like in whatever maneuvering is required to kind of to sell himself. I mean, I guess I don't know, I have a couple thoughts about like the that statement. And I do think there is a little bit of like, if we drill down in the data on like how this election kind of shook out, right? There's like a lot of different narratives that you can draw from this. But I think one of them is there is a gender element. I think that's, if anything, that might be one of the strongest actually breakdowns of the election, because I think that race mattered less in this his win than I think a lot of, especially Democrats, would like to jump to that kind of conclusion. I don't know that that's the right conclusion to make, because there's a lot of evidence to show that he grew his popularity in diverse coalitions. Yep. But certainly younger people and men, I think, were more likely to vote for him. And because if we think about like where men are right now as a young male cohort, they're not doing so great, especially compared to the girls. Right. And so like, I think there's probably a little bit of like a backlash to that. Also like I mean, it is also just like a problem that we do need to solve, right? Like, I mean, when we, as we've kind of approached any, I think, as somebody who's more progressive or a Democrat, like we're always like, how do we help everybody become successful, right? And we we've tried to approach that for every, subcategory of demographic. But then now that it's like, okay, well, it's like the men that are struggling, people are like, oh no, I can't possibly. But I'm like, that's another, I mean, when I look at like one of the reasons that Democrats lost this election, if you go to the DNC or whatever the website, during the election, if you clicked on like the groups that we serve, it's every demographic subgroup in the world except for white men. And it's like, why don't they get to be included too? Like, that's the part is, I think it's crazy, but like the Democrats have always tried to, I think, purport this like kind of big tent, anybody's included sort of branding, like that's historically been the branding. But now I think the brand is more like you can look any particular way or be any kind of particular person as long as you are a college educated person who has a certain like income level. I know then I don't care about anything else. But that's the breakdown, I think, of kind of what is going on.
Yeah. Well, and that's the David Brooks article in The Atlantic, where he breaks down kind of how the meritocracy has really damaged
the brand.
Yeah.
And it's wealth and it's that class, like an educated class. I mean, it's just, and that self kind of fulfills too.
Yeah. And that in order, that the testing historically was trying to solve the problem of privilege, people coming into higher education and higher status universities because of, my grandfather went there, my father went there, blah, blah, blah. But it just created a different kind of meritocracy in terms of like who has the money to do these things. And also in terms of the big tent, right? We care that you're, you can be any of these things, but you can't be a white man.
Yeah. Or we're going to like specifically blame you for everything that's gone wrong. I mean, like whether or not it was like, obviously personally you're being like not responsible. Right. But like that, I mean, I think that has been a problem like of, and I mean, I don't know. I've been saying that for a while, but I'm like, that's a losing message.
Well, it is. 'Cause I mean, I mean, again, this goes in the Joe Rogan pile. You're not going to win on that platform.
No. And what's tough is like Joe Biden, Kamala specifically aren't saying these things, right? It's not like they're specifically like, we're excluding people, right? Like, or this group of people, or blaming this group of people, or whatever. Like, it's not the leaders of the party that are saying these things. I mean, which is a contrast, I think, to the Republicans, where they have actually empowered the fringes of the party to be the leaders, as opposed to the individuals that are more moderate. Now, a lot of people that I know that are more moderate or conservative thought that, Kamala was like a radical, or, that was it.
Which is just crazy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
She's like,
I think it's hard to shake the like San Francisco brand, I don't know.
But even that, like, people think of her as like a, liberal, people that are more on the liberal side are like, oh, she was,
a prosecutor. They don't see her as being super lefty. Yeah. Yeah. No. I know.
Nobody is radical. I mean, there's probably the majority of the country is moderate, and probably the majority of our politicians are probably moderate, but we've got this messaging that, because we're just all being driven by fear and told these messages that are just not true.
Yeah. And messages that are being pumped to us by algorithms that are designed to commodify our attention for profit, and do not care about any other outcome other than like the cash register. So it's a I don't know. How do we solve that problem? I don't know. But a good place to land this is like, okay, well, how do we can't solve that, right? But we can solve just our individual interactions that we have with each other each day.
And this is what I said to somebody yesterday, and this came out kind of through our conversation. I was really grateful for it. Is that, for people who have people in their lives who voted differently than them, whether you're a Trump supporter and you have somebody that voted for Kamala, or you're a Democrat and you have a friend or a family member who voted for Trump, I would say take that as an opportunity and a gift in your life, because we can't do anything in a global sense. We can't do anything. The only things that we can do are locally. We can do things locally, and the most local, the most micro that we can be is in those relationships. So if you're somebody who doesn't know anybody who voted differently from you, I think you need to intentionally really create those bridge relationships, because it's super easy for you as somebody who doesn't have those bridge relationships to then other an entire half of the country, right?
Yeah.
And you can start kind of telling stories, and it can really be a downfall just spiritually for you to be really, really cynical and angry. And, that's only hurting you. It's like lighting a fire and, you're the only one getting burned or something. It's you're not hurting, and, there's no vengeance that's being sought here when you're just polarizing an entire half the country. That's not going to help you. But if you can have those conversations with people that are close to you, that you love, or that you have history with, and you can build those relationships.
And you're seeking to understand, right? Like the goal is, to learn, not to win, right? That's the ticket, I think.
That's the ticket. And it also doesn't mean, for a lot of people I've talked to, they're talking about like their parents, or, people that are kind of, they're not necessarily peers, but they're people that are kind of elders. And it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
how do I, like, I don't feel like I can have those kind of, those conversations without there being, and to those people, I also say, you don't have to start arguments. You don't have to confront, but you also don't have to hide and like pretend nothing matters. Like,
Yeah.
you can also just be in relationship with them and kind of be sad about some things, that there are things that on a core level you just don't connect with, and that there's some grief there, and that's okay
Yeah.
to also to own that, and to not feel like you have to hide that, and just pretend everything's okay either.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good advice. Um, one other book that I have been thinking
Yeah.
about is I'm rereading Yuval Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And for those who are familiar with Yuval, I've mentioned him on the show before, but he wrote Sapiens, which is like the best, the big hit.
Yeah.
And then he wrote a book called Homo Deus. So Sapiens is tracing the history of human beings, like as they were kind of in competition with other sapiens on the planet, and why did we win out? Homo Deus sort of imagines what is going to be the future of humans when the dual revolutions of infotech and biotech really transform what a human being is, which is like a human combined with a computer in some manner. And then the 21 lessons for the 21st century is really looking at like, what are the problems of now? And like, what are the stories that have historically moved us through time? And like, how are those stories going to be challenged? And so I read it. It was published in 2018, so it was 2 years after Trump was elected the first time. I read it in like 2020, and then reading it again now, it's like, oh my gosh, it's so much even clearer, right? But what he talks about at the beginning, which I think is maybe something for us to all kind of like puzzle over, maybe it's something to lean into when you're trying to like have a learning conversation with somebody else. But he opens the book really with like this concept of like bewilderment. Of like where like nobody knows where we kind of are, where we're going. Like it feels really unsettling.
Yeah.
That the three stories that have carried most of human history as far as like political economic apparatuses have been authoritarianism or totalitarianism, communism, and democracy. And for most of the 20th century into the beginning of the 21st century, we all thought like the democracy story, which is the liberal, like big L, not like the party, but like liberalism as a concept,
right?
That democracy had won. Right.
Yeah.
Which, if you believe in like a liberal philosophy, you believe like you get to make choices about your life. Right. Like that. And most of us would, even if we're Republicans, like would agree that that's
for
kind
sure
of the philosophy. Right.
Right.
But these revolutions in technology are already and starting to really, really challenge that will be the narrative that will be the winner, right? And it might be that it's a new narrative, like it's none of the three, but like the Trump and individuals that have sort of risen around the world that sort of are emulating in that same style have this more like authoritarianism sort of. So
would populism be part of totalitarianism, or would that be like a fourth?
Yeah,
narrative?
Populism is so kind of what happens with like if we think about like Karl Marx, right? Like which interestingly like the some of the messaging that we are hearing from the far right is actually more like is pretty emblematic of like messaging you would hear also on like the far left.
Yes.
And so but ultimately like that it's about everything's about power. Every interaction is about like you're not just having an interaction. There's like a power dynamic in what
which is like 100% Trump, right?
Yeah. So no, I mean, Trump's definitely a popular, the some of the populism stuff is like stuff that we've seen before. And it might be that it's one of those three stories, but it's that um it might just be a future that we can't imagine yet,
Yeah.
because we don't really know, like, if we think about the acceleration of technology,
Yeah.
we don't even know where we'll end up. Like it's
Yeah.
going to change so quickly.
Yeah. I have two thoughts. One interesting and one completely banal. One, also an interview, like Andrea Merkel's book just came out, and I saw an interview with her about that, and she talks about that interaction with Trump where Trump wouldn't shake her hand, that really awkward time that they had, and she was like, I think they want us to shake hands, and he just ignored her. And it's just in that power, right? Like,
yeah, interesting.
And she talks about how his, she just really felt like he was vying for power in that moment, and that somehow a handshake, and you see that so with his, like, just body language, how he's constantly trying to, I don't know, just step into power in any interaction he has. Also, AI. There's a really good new horror movie on Netflix.
Okay.
It's kind of dumb, but it's actually a pretty good horror movie about AI. It's called Afraid.
Okay. So we should end. We can end with recommendations. So the other one, I started watching this Netflix series with Ted Danson that just came out. It's the people that did
The Good Place.
Yes, The Good Place. It's called A Man on the Inside, and it's very cute. And then one other, so everybody keeps telling me to go see Heretic, which I want to see it, but I haven't. Is it Richard Gere? I can't remember. Could be
Heretic. Is it a movie?
It's a movie. And it's kind of like a thriller. So I think, kind of in the like Get Out. Remember that movie, the Jordan Peele movie? It's that's what they've kind of described it. It's like more of like I think in some ways people think it's a horror movie, but it's really like a thriller is more of my understanding.
I would also
go find a friend of a different political persuasion and ask them to go to the movies.
Yeah. Also, a couple other things. I've been watching, also, if you are of the Democratic, more liberal, progressive persuasion, I would suggest watching some Taylor Sheridan shows, because that man, first of all, is I don't know how he's doing it. He's writing so many series right now. Like he's the one who did Yellowstone. He's doing Lioness, which is really good. And then he has a new one called Landman with Billy Bob Thornton, who is hilarious in it. And Landman is about like the oil industry and like the oil workers in Texas. And I just feel like he speaks to that
the pastoral.
Yeah, like the military, the military in Lioness, the like cowboys in the West, and then like the oilmen, and he definitely puts a lot of I don't know if people might say like propaganda, like there's monologues, but they're interesting. I mean, and they give you some, like Billy Bob Thornton had a monologue about wind energy and like all of the oil that it takes to create like a wind, and I was like, huh, okay, that's interesting. So again, even if you can't have a conversation with somebody, I would say Taylor Sheridan has some shows for you that can give you some insight into maybe a part of the country that you don't have a lot of interaction with.
Yeah, that's not your neighborhood, right?
Yeah, that's not in your neighborhood. And also, and I've said this one a lot on this show, but Jesus and John Wayne, if you want to know how we got here, if you're a Christian person, particularly if you're a Christian woman, but also, if you're a Christian man, like read Jesus and John Wayne, and it will give you the history of basically how we got here on the wings of patriarchy, and a revival tent. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, good recommendations.
Yeah.
Good chatting. I feel it's a cathartic kind
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah. And just talk about it too,
Yeah.
I think, grab a friend and talk about it, and look inward, ask, what can I do? What have we done? As opposed to just blaming.
Yeah. Good
All right.
stuff.
All right.
Well,
Next
good to see
time,
you as always.
good
Yeah,
to see you
next time.
too. Next time. Well, I really want to. Okay. So have you seen Wicked yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay. All right. Well, next you got to see Wicked, and then maybe we can have a little conversation about the gospel according to Elphaba.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I think it'd be a good thing.
Okay. I'm on.
All right.
I'm in. All right.
All right.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Love you.
Love you too.
Bye.
Bye.
A huge heartfelt thank you to all of our listeners. Some of you joined us a year ago, some of you joined us recently, but all of you are helping us grow the show. Thank you so much.
Atheist is still advertising free, sponsor free, and available for free to everyone. Lots of podcasts have big production teams. Our team is just 3 friends working together to make something we hope puts good into the world and brings value to your life.
But we always need your help. Please spread the word and share the show. All of our social links and other ways to support the show are available on atheistpodcast.com.
Atheist is produced by Justin Seiwell of Trend Media, STL. Thank you for listening, and keep looking for connection.